This video is brought to you by the trip I'm hosting to Germany and Austria in September. I'm really excited, so I have too many things to say about it, so I've put them at the end. Enjoy! World War II was not a good time, yeah? No other war in human history has killed as many people, and God willing and the creek don't rise, no other war ever will, because if it does, there's gonna be nukes, and then nobody's having a good time. But if you were living through World War II, what were the odds that you would still be alive in 1945? Depends a lot on where you live. If you were an American citizen, you were chilling. Counting civilians and soldiers together, your odds of dying in the war were just under 1/3 of 1%. If you were British, about 1%. France, 1.5%. Japan, 4%. Germany, 8%. Russia, nearly 14%. And if you were unlucky enough to be Polish, God help you, your odds of dying in the war were nearly 1 in 5. Those are staggering numbers, but other wars had countries whose survival rates were much worse. World War I was one of them. If you were Serbian, your odds of dying could have been as high as 1 in 4. When you reach this point, so many people are dead, it's hard to even measure. Bronze and silver medals both go to China, who managed to kill around 1 in 3 of its people twice before the invention of gunpowder. But even that is chump change compared to the #1 spot, who lost about 60%. If you were alive in this country at the start of the war, and you did not find a way to get out by the end, you were twice as likely to be dead as alive. That's not soldiers, that's everybody. Women, children, the elderly, everybody. And it happened in just 6 years. And that country was Paraguay. When was the last time you thought about Paraguay? Frankly, that's impressive. In World War II, Germany was actively trying to raise their own death count, and they only came away with 8%. How did Paraguay manage to do 7 times that? It all starts with our good friend colonialism. Roll clip.
1494. Spain and Portugal are both really into this new business of sailing the seas and owning everything you touch, but they have a problem. What if the other country sails the seas and touches the stuff that they own? That would be bad. So they cut the world in half. Spain owns this half of the earth, and Portugal owns this half of the earth.
The border that divided Portugal and Spain was a straight line through South America. A straight line is kind of a crap border, so they tried fixing the border with a treaty. And then another treaty, and another treaty, many treaties over many centuries, and by the time South America gets independence, the border problem still isn't solved. Now, instead of Spain and Portugal, it's Argentina and Brazil fighting, and they're mostly fighting over Paraguay. Paraguay, in response, made like a porcupine and funded the single largest army in South America. Even so, the president of Paraguay ruled with a simple creed: always by the pen, never by the sword. Unfortunately, he died in 1862 and gave Paraguay to his son. What about guns, Papa? What about guns? That son was Francisco Solano Lopez, and he was kind of like a Nepo baby Napoleon. He spent his gap year as an envoy to France, got really into military history, and brought home a bunch of changes to Frenchify the Paraguayan army, as well as a lot of guns. And as soon as he became president, he found a use for those guns. Paraguay had only one friend, and that was Uruguay. Or at least it was. Mr. President, the Brazilians invaded Uruguay. My Aguay? No, they invaded his Aguay and made it their friend's Aguay instead, and our Aguay might be next! Without support from Uruguay, Paraguay would be all alone, and so Lopez declared war on Brazil. So listen, as far as wars go, this was not a crazy war. I wouldn't want to die for this war, but there was a clear, limited objective. Get in, defend Uruguay's government, get the Brazilians out, and then leave. And while Brazil had a lot more people than Paraguay, Lopez was packing a pretty big army. In mere weeks, Lopez tore through over 100 miles of Brazilian territory. Unfortunately, he went the wrong way. Uruguay was south of Paraguay, but Lopez knew a shortcut. Hey, Argentina, you won't even know I'm here. No. Then you have fallen right into my trap. Declaring war on Argentina was a little risky, but not completely dumb. Argentina just had a civil war, and Lopez was friends with the losers. This was just the distraction the rebels needed to rise up, and then Argentina would be so busy fighting itself it wouldn't even notice Lopez marching through. In theory. In reality, Lopez single-handedly restored unity to Argentina as both sides worked together in harmony to kick him out of the country. Oh well, that's what the guns were for. Lopez tore across Argentina in a bloody campaign to rescue Uruguay's government. They had already surrendered. Lopez was still stuck in Argentina, and Brazil had already installed a new government in Uruguay. Game over. But Lopez was in too deep. Uruguay is only the battle. We will win the war. Lopez went to war with Uruguay too. But if Napoleon could fight all of Europe, Lopez could fight half of South America. I don't think anyone ever told him that Napoleon lost. Whether or not Lopez could win the war was really going to come down to one thing: rivers. You are not getting an army through this, or this, or this. If you want in or out of Paraguay, you are taking the river. To get control of the river, Lopez settled on a simple stealth mission. Sneak in under the cover of night and hijack the Brazilian ships while they slept. Odds of survival if we just start shooting. Crunching the numbers. 32.33%. Repeating, of course. Light her up. The Paraguayans opened fire, waking up all of the Brazilians. A few hours later, Paraguay's navy was in the river, and the Allies' counteroffensive was underway. Now, the Allies don't actually want to conquer all of Paraguay. Well, Argentina does, but Brazil won't let them. What they want is to get rid of Lopez, and by this point, probably settle those border disputes. But Lopez tells his army that Paraguay's very survival hinges on him keeping his job. And sure, he may have lost the navy, but the navy is just the battle. All they had to do was launch a counteroffensive, because offense means you're winning. This is the part where everybody starts dying. The Paraguayan army charged headlong into the largest battle ever fought in South America and lost. The dead Paraguayans were too many to bury. They were heaped into piles to be burned, and some were so skin and bones already that they wouldn't light. The survivors had fled in so many different directions, it took days for Lopez to find them all, but what's most amazing to me is that no matter how many casualties they took, Paraguay never seriously pushed back. Seemingly every man, woman, and child in Paraguay was willing to follow this man to hell and back, if they even came back. And Lopez needed every man, woman, and child in Paraguay because he was far from giving up. We almost won. And if we double our army, we can almost win again. Lopez swells his ranks with senior citizens and kids and sends them barefoot onto the battlefield, and still nobody seemed to mind? One observer noted how every time a man got blown up by an artillery shell, all his mates would laugh and go, "Ah, good one." Soldiers were whipped to maintain discipline, and yet they were one big happy family. Soldiers called their officers father, and Lopez at the top was Big Papa. Big Papa, credit where it's due, finally sued for peace, and the demands were simple: unconditional surrender. That's a tough pill to swallow. This story would be a lot simpler if every casualty was the fault of Lopez's comedic stubbornness, but Paraguay really could be on the chopping block. But then again, men are being slaughtered on the front lines. Cholera and yellow fever have begun to take hold, and Lopez's men start to wonder if surrender might still be the best option. Lopez seems to think the only reason he's losing is because he's not whipping his men hard enough. He flogs his own mother and shoots anyone who wants to surrender. It wasn't enough. The Allies sacked the capital and looted everything of value. It was over. The war is only the battle! Yeah, no, Lopez still doesn't surrender. I guess at this point he's channeling the Taliban more than Napoleon. He runs off into the countryside with a bunch of tweens in loincloths to go stage an insurgency. Paraguay has officially declared war on Paraguay. The plan, to the extent that there was one, was to starve out the Allies during their occupation. So, to clarify, disease was spreading around the country, there were no men left to work the fields because they all got shot, the country was under military occupation, and now the Lord of the Flies over here was going around burning all the food. Lopez wanted to fight until he was the last man in Paraguay. He would have to settle for the last man in his army. The Allies finally caught up to him in 1870. Do you admit defeat? Do you? Running away, are you? Would someone take that sword away? He's gonna hurt himself. I die with my nation! Lopez died as he had lived, continuing to fight until he managed to hurt himself in the process. The cost to Paraguay was astronomical. Besides losing almost 40% of its territory, at least half the population, and maybe 90% of the adult men were just gone. And yet, Lopez is remembered to this day as a national hero. And I don't know what to think about that. I don't know if this man is the greatest propagandist to ever live, or maybe when war takes everything from you, all you've got left to hold on to is the story. When do you give up fighting for something you believe in? You've just finished watching a 10-minute video on a 19th century war over Paraguay. May I assume you like history? I want to tell you about one of the coolest history experiences I've ever had in going on 10 years of running this channel. For a couple years now, I've been hosting vacations to historical destinations around the world, and I remember the first trip we took in Italy, there was a moment where I was standing in the Vatican Museum, face to face with a statue of Augustus Caesar from the home of his widow. And in that moment, though 2,000 years had flown over his head, it was like he and I were separated by just 1 degree of separation. The feeling of standing on the same ground as did those feet in ancient times is what keeps pulling me back, so I'm doing it again, this time in Germany and Austria. I've done a lot to customize the itinerary to bring us face to face with history. We're going to see the tombs of the Holy Roman Emperors and the crown that fell from their heads, and wander the fairy tale halls of Neuschwanstein, the magnum opus of Ludwig II, the fangirl king I have been obsessed with for years. This is what happens when the budget of an entire monarchy goes to one single art project. And we're going with a great group too. Obviously I'll be there, I've studied quite a lot of history, but I have learned so many strange and wonderful stories about history just through the people who have signed up for these trips in the past. I have never been a my subscribers are my family type guy, but getting to meet some of you in person, I am really proud of what a perceptive and insightful community has built up around this channel. There's a group I'm hosting in Japan this May that's already trading memes and running a book club in our Discord server. And incidentally, we're starting to take names from the waitlist. I know Japan is on a lot of bucket lists. Our itinerary is in the description along with details on our payment plans. Anyone who signs up at that URL before March 19th can join us. First come, first served. The full itinerary for Germany and Austria is gonna drop any day now in an announcement video. Spots are more limited than before. We still need 8 people to confirm the trip, but we can't take more than 20 this time. There's 2 ways you can be notified before that video goes live. Announcement videos don't exactly go viral on YouTube, and YouTube isn't always the best at delivering to subscribers, so I'm sharing an early link on my Patreon page, and I'm putting together an email list, only for the sake of these trips, to make sure that everybody who wants to can stay up to date. I'm incredibly excited about this trip, and because history is even more powerful when you immerse yourself in it beforehand, I want to try something new. Starting sometime in April, I want to start making more videos on the medieval and early modern history of Germany and Austria, so if there's a topic you love in that part of history, I would love to hear about it. And yeah, that's about it. We're doing some traveling, would love to have you. Thanks. Goodbye.